He was nobody, just another name in a broken city. Another face in a crowd that didn't care if he rose or disappeared. His alarm rang every morning at 6:15, and every morning he turned it off and stared at the ceiling for 10 minutes, not because he was lazy, but because he didn't see the point. Same job, same paycheck, same bus, same routine. Life was a loop, and he was stuck on repeat. His name was Adam Gray, a man with no dream left, just a long list of things he never finished. He had notebooks filled with plans, goals, resolutions. None of them made it past February. His mirror showed him someone tired, not physically, but deeply, soul tired. He smiled in public, laughed in meetings, replied to emails, but inside, something was missing. Not success, not even love, just purpose. One evening, while walking home in the cold, he saw a man training in a dark alley behind a closed gym. The man wasn't young, maybe in his late 40s, bald, heavy-set, sweating like fire was pouring from his skin. He was punching a worn-out bag like it had insulted his family. There was no music, no crowd, no applause, just raw emotion. Adam stopped. He watched for 5 minutes. The man didn't notice. He was too focused. Too inside the moment. Next day, Adam walked past again. Same man, same punches, same storm in his eyes. After a week, Adam asked, "Why are you doing this?" The man stopped, looked straight at him and said, "Because no one's coming to fix my life, so I have to." That line stuck. Adam went home that night and opened one of his old notebooks. He read every failed plan, every goal with a start date but no finish line. He didn't feel shame. He felt awake. For the first time in years. He tore out every page, threw it away, took a blank one at the top. He wrote, "I'll stop waiting. I'll start moving." The next morning he woke up at 5:30. He didn't go to the gym, he didn't run 5 miles. He just made his bed, took a cold shower, ate real food, sat in silence for 10 minutes without touching his phone. That was it. But it felt like a war won. That was day 1. On day 2 he added 10 push-ups, watched a video on mindset, wrote 3 things he was grateful for. On day 3 he started reading a book he'd left halfway 2 years ago. He didn't tell anyone, not yet. He didn't post it on Instagram. He wasn't chasing validation, he was chasing change, quietly, ruthlessly. People at work noticed he smiled differently. Not like he was faking it, but like he had seen something they hadn't. A calm fire in his eyes, a tension in his shoulders that said, "I'm not running anymore. I'm building." One night, his friend asked, "What's gotten into you?" Adam smiled. "Nothing got into me, I just stopped letting everything get out of me." Adam didn't wake up one day and become unstoppable. He woke up and decided to stop quitting. That was the difference. Not the workouts, not the books, not the routines. It was the mindset, the quiet one that whispered, "If you don't control your life, someone else will." There were hard days. Days when the alarm felt heavier than ever, when his body ached, when the cold water hit like punishment, when his friends said he was acting strange, but he stayed with it, not because it was easy, because it was necessary. He wasn't chasing a transformation, he was chasing discipline. That invisible line that separates people who dream from people who build. He stopped scrolling, he stopped gossiping, he stopped waiting for motivation. He knew now motivation was a lie. It came and went, but discipline stayed. And if he could trust anything in this world, it was discipline. By month 2, he was a different man, not louder, just firmer. He walked straighter, he spoke less. He finished what he started. His room was clean, his mind was clearer. He knew what he wanted, not because someone told him, but because he sat in silence and asked himself, "What do I want my life to look like in 5 years? What will I regret not starting today? And most importantly, who do I become if I keep doing what I'm doing?" Those questions haunted him, but they also guided him. One night he stood in front of the same mirror he used to avoid. He looked into his own eyes and didn't see a man who was tired anymore. He saw a man who had been tested and passed, quietly, consistently, without applause. A few weeks later, a coworker knocked on his door, looked nervous, said, "I've been watching you. You've changed. I don't know what it is, but I want it too." Adam didn't hand him a book, didn't sell a course. He just said, "Set your alarm 30 minutes earlier tomorrow and don't hit snooze." The man laughed. "That's it." Adam nodded. "That's where everything starts. A single decision, repeated daily. That's how lives are built. That's how mindsets are forged." He had changed, but the world hadn't. Adam was evolving in silence, brick by brick, moment by moment, but everything outside him still moved with the same chaos, the same noise, the same distractions that once swallowed him whole. Now, with a new lens, he began seeing it all differently. He began noticing how people lived on autopilot, how days became years without meaning, how men gave up on their fire before they even turned 30. He looked around and saw people living for the weekend, existing from paycheck to paycheck, drowning in obligations they didn't even choose. It wasn't judgment that filled his chest, it was realization. They weren't weak, they were lost, just like he had been, but Adam had discovered something that most people never stopped long enough to feel: the silence inside. Not the silence of a quiet room, the silence of clarity. The stillness that comes when you stop running from yourself, when you face the truth, not as an enemy but as a mirror. That silence was violent at first. It screamed at him. It showed him his lies, his excuses, the people he blamed, the habits he defended. But eventually, that silence became his compass. Each morning was still a battle. The alarm didn't feel lighter, the cold shower didn't feel warmer, the workouts didn't get easier. But he didn't need easy, he needed real. And this was real. The kind of real that left you sore but proud, tired but aligned. The kind of real that made every shallow pleasure look like a cheap trick. He stopped chasing pleasure. He started building peace. It was slower, but it was permanent at work. He didn't hustle for attention anymore. He didn't stay late to look impressive. He did what mattered. He spoke when needed. And when he spoke, people listened. His boss once asked him in a meeting, what changed? Adam replied, I stopped trying to win and started trying to grow. That one sentence traveled through the office like a quiet storm. It didn't make him popular, it made him respected. There's a difference, but the outside respect never matched the inside work. That was the part no one saw. The early mornings when his mind begged for rest. The late nights when loneliness crept in. The weekends when others partied and he stayed home sharpening his mind. Reading books that stretched him, writing thoughts that revealed patterns, uncovering fears he had buried under sarcasm and small talk. For years one night, after a long day, he sat on the floor of his apartment, lights off, back against the wall, knees pulled in. He wasn't sad, he wasn't broken, but something inside him cracked open. Not like glass shattering, more like a locked chest finally being unsealed. A memory came to him, a version of himself, 5 years younger, crying in a car after another failed job interview. That version felt small, hopeless, like he had nothing left to offer the world. Now, in the dark silence of his room, he whispered, I forgive you, not as a gesture, as a truth. He forgave the man he was, the boy who didn't know better, who gave up too soon, who waited for help that never came, who thought worth was something earned from others. He forgave him, and in doing so, accepted him. That night, he didn't sleep early. He sat with himself, for the first time, not out of shame, but out of honor. He was no longer ashamed of his past. He was grateful for it. In the weeks that followed, he took it deeper. He fasted once a week, not for weight loss, but to train his mind. He took long walks without music, forcing himself to hear his thoughts. He stared into mirrors and repeated truths, not affirmations, but things he once feared to say. I am enough. I am not a victim. I am responsible. I am capable. I don't need to be saved. I need to act. At first the words felt like lies, but repetition is a weapon, and soon they started to feel like armor. He started journaling everything, not for followers, for clarity. Every trigger, every temptation, every moment he almost quit but didn't. He studied himself like a soldier studies an enemy. He mapped his weakness. He tracked his patterns. He saw how boredom led to bad choices, how loneliness led to texting the wrong people, how fear disguised itself as logic, how procrastination wore the mask of rest. He became dangerous, not because he was aggressive, because he became aware, and awareness changes everything. When you know why you fall, you can build where you once collapsed. When you know what scares you, you can walk into it with strategy, not just courage. When you know what distracts you, you can remove it without guilt. Adam wasn't chasing motivation anymore. He was building mastery, over self, over mind, over the subtle ways the world steals your time, your energy, your soul. Then came the real test. Life doesn't let you evolve without resistance. One morning he got a call. His mother had been hospitalized. Years of ignoring health caught up. He packed a bag and flew out the same day. The hospital was cold. Her condition was worse than expected. Doctors were vague. His siblings were emotional. Chaos returned. He hadn't been in that city in years. Old memories hit him like bricks. The streets, the family tension, the smell of his childhood room. The scars returned. But he didn't collapse. He did what he always did now. He stayed silent. He breathed. He wrote. He served. He spent nights at the hospital, days running errands. He didn't skip his routines. He did push-ups next to her hospital bed. He journaled in stairwells. He drank water while others reached for sugar. His family mocked him. "You're still doing that discipline thing." He smiled and replied, "That's the only reason I'm not falling apart." One night his mother opened her eyes, weak but aware. She whispered, "You look different." He held her hand and said, "I finally figured out how to live." She nodded slowly. There was peace in her gaze. Not because she understood, but because she could see it. In his posture, in his presence, in the way he held space, not as a burdened son, but as a calm force. After 2 weeks she stabilized. He flew back, but he wasn't the same. Something had solidified in him, like fire turned to stone. He had walked into his old life and didn't get swallowed. He had faced pain and didn't flinch. He had carried others and still stood tall. That's when he knew this wasn't a phase. This was who he was now. One evening he found his old notebook again, the one with the first fresh page, the one where he wrote, "I'll stop waiting, I'll start moving." He flipped through the rest. It was filled now. Pages of pain, pages of wins, pages of truths, pages of discipline. And one page near the end just said, "It worked." In small, shaky handwriting. That was the moment he allowed himself a smile, a full one. No guilt, no performance, just quiet. Pride because the world hadn't changed, but he had, and that changed everything. He came back to his city, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Not because the streets had changed, but because he had. The coffee shop he used to sit in for hours, scrolling through his phone, now felt noisy. The people he used to admire for their charm now felt hollow. The buildings looked smaller. The things he once dreamed of looked less shiny. That's what growth does. It doesn't make the world smaller, it makes your purpose bigger. And once your purpose grows, distractions shrink. He still faced hard days. He still felt tired. The mental war never really ended. But now he knew it wasn't about fighting perfectly, it was about showing up anyway. It was about movement over mood. He didn't care how he felt anymore. He cared what he did. Feelings were guests. Discipline was the landlord. Some nights he sat on his bed with his eyes closed, hands resting on his lap, breathing slow, listening, not to music, not to podcasts, but to himself. In that silence, he met a man he used to avoid, himself. The younger version of him that always waited for the world to give him permission. The version that needed approval, praise, backup plans. That version still lived inside him, but now, it no longer led. It sat quietly in the back as the real Adam stepped forward. People noticed, but they didn't understand. They thought he was lucky that he had finally found balance, that he figured out how to be calm. They didn't see the early mornings, the battles, the skipped parties, the journal pages soaked in doubt. They didn't know that calm came at a cost. That peace was paid for with pain. They didn't see the sacrifices, and they weren't supposed to. Because real growth doesn't demand applause, it demands persistence. One day, a younger employee at work asked him how he stayed so focused, how he didn't get distracted like everyone else. Adam looked at him and said, "I deleted the part of me that needed chaos." The young man was confused. "What do you mean?" Adam replied, "I used to need noise. I needed music in the background. I needed people to talk to. I needed something to scroll, something to eat, something to escape into, because I couldn't sit alone with my thoughts. Now I can. And when you can sit with your thoughts without running, you can finally build from a place of truth." That night, Adam wrote a new sentence in his notebook. Not every battle is visible. Not every warrior wears armor. Some of us fight with a coffee in one hand and a heavy heart in the other, but we show up anyway. That line stayed with him. He repeated it every morning. Because it wasn't poetry, it was survival. He started giving time to others quietly, helping a stranger carry groceries, leaving books at the park with notes inside, responding to messages from people who needed hope. He didn't broadcast it. He didn't turn his kindness into content. He did it because real strength gives, not because it wants to be seen, but because it knows what it means to be invisible and hurting. Adam never imagined that something so personal, so private, so quiet, would begin to echo in the lives of others. He hadn't chased the spotlight. He hadn't advertised his evolution. He hadn't branded his habits, but people noticed. Not because he was louder, but because he was deeper. There was something unshakable about him now. A calmness in his step, a power in his silence, the kind of power that doesn't threaten, it anchors. People began reaching out to him, not for motivation, for direction, for permission to take control of their own chaos. They didn't say it. Like that, they asked simple questions. How do I stay consistent? How do I wake up early? How do I stop quitting? But beneath those questions was a single cry. Can I become someone new to Adam? Never answered with tactics. He answered with truth, and the truth was never complicated. It was uncomfortable. He told them the truth doesn't show up with fireworks. It shows up when your alarm rings and no one is watching. When your heart is tired but your soul reminds you why you started. When you walk away from comfort because your future deserves more than your present pleasure. That's when it begins. That's where it begins. He still fought the same mind battles. Doubt still whispered. Temptation still visited. But now, his response wasn't panic. It was awareness. That alone made him unstoppable. Because a man who sees his enemy clearly cannot be fooled. He had become a man who didn't just react. He responded. With intention, with alignment, with clarity. And when clarity replaces chaos, greatness is no longer an accident. It becomes the result. One day he was invited to speak at a local event. Nothing big, just a small room. A group of young people stuck in the same cycle he once lived in. He almost said no. He didn't see himself as a speaker, but something inside nudged him, not for recognition, for responsibility. He walked in, stood quietly in front of the group, and said nothing for 10 full seconds. Everyone stared, some awkwardly, some curiously. Then he said, "You're not stuck because of your situation. You're stuck because you keep making peace with the habits that destroy you." The room went silent. No slides, no quotes, no performance, just truth, unfiltered. He didn't talk about success. He talked about silence. He talked about the mornings when no one sees your sacrifice, about the nights when discipline feels like punishment, about the loneliness of choosing growth in a world built on escape. And when he was done, no one clapped immediately. They sat in stillness. That's when he knew it had landed. Not because it was entertaining, but because it was real. After the event, one of the students came up to him, a young man, nervous, emotional. He said, "I thought something was wrong with me. I thought I was broken, but I just never had an example of what it looks like to take your power back. Thank you." Adam didn't respond with a smile. He responded with a hand on the shoulder and said, "You don't need to become me. You need to become the version of you that you keep postponing." That sentence stuck with Adam more than it stuck with the student, because that's what he had done for years. Postponed himself, delayed his evolution, outsourced his potential to timing, to motivation, to others. But not anymore. Now, every moment was a decision. Every breath was a choice. And he was choosing forward. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt, there were still tests. Life doesn't reward growth without resistance. One day his company went through layoffs. Budgets were cut. Positions dissolved. Uncertainty spread like wildfire. Fear returned. Not the loud kind. The quiet kind that slips in during routine. He was called into a meeting. The energy in the room was heavy. His name was on the list, effective immediately. "Thank you for your service." That's all they said. No explanation. No transition. Just an exit. He walked out with a box in his hand, his name tag, a framed quote he kept on his desk, and a single pen. But there was no panic in his step, no collapse in his posture. Because Adam knew your job isn't your identity. Your paycheck isn't your value. Your title isn't your worth. And so, he didn't flinch. He walked out of that building not as a man who lost something, but as a man who had been freed. The next day, he woke up at the same time, followed the same routine, did the same workout. Not because he was pretending everything was fine, but because the foundation of his life was never built on circumstance. It was built on character. And character doesn't crumble with change. It adapts over the next few weeks. He doubled down on everything that made him whole. He helped more people, gave more time, wrote more deeply. He wasn't chasing the next paycheck. He was creating something bigger. A path, not for followers, but for those still trapped in a life they didn't choose. He started mentoring a few young men quietly. No titles, no fees, just connection, just truth. They met weekly. No one shared their wins, only their losses, their battles, their doubts. And in those rooms, healing began. Transformation began. Not because Adam had the answers, but because he had the presence. Then came the call that would shift everything. A small media company had seen his talk online. They wanted to feature his story. A short interview. Nothing fancy. He almost declined. But something said go. Not for fame, for fire, for the message. He sat in a simple chair. No script, just a camera and a question. "What changed your life?" Adam looked straight ahead and said, "I stopped waiting to feel ready. I stopped negotiating with my pain. I stopped blaming the world, and I started acting like my life was my fault." That was the mindset that changed everything. The clip went viral, not because of algorithms, but because of alignment. Because people don't connect with polish, they connect with truth. Stripped, raw, real, thousands reached out. Some asking for tips, some sharing their stories, some just saying thank you. Adam didn't reply to all, but he read every message, because he remembered what it felt like to be unheard. To scream in silence, to drown in comfort. Now his voice wasn't loud, but it was heard, and not because he forced it, because he earned it, through every early morning, through every disciplined decision, through every uncomfortable truth he faced alone. The world hadn't handed him success. He had taken back control, not all at once, one day at a time, one hard decision at a time, and that's where he was now, not at the top, but in alignment, and that he knew was the real win. The win no one claps for, the win no one sees, but the win that changes everything. He was standing at the same place where it all began, same old park, same bench, same quiet, but this time, he wasn't broken, he wasn't confused, he wasn't waiting for answers from the sky. He just sat there, calm, steady, still like a mountain that had seen every storm and stayed standing. There was peace in his eyes, the kind of peace you earn, the kind that doesn't come from winning. It comes from changing. He looked around and smiled to himself. So much had changed, yet nothing had changed. The world was still noisy, people were still distracted, social media still screamed for attention, fear still ruled hearts, but his soul had gone silent, not numb, just strong. And in that silence he finally understood the meaning of purpose. It wasn't a dream, it wasn't a goal, it was how you wake up, how you carry yourself, how you face your worst days and still refuse. Twofold. He took out his notebook. The last page was blank. He stared at it for a while, then slowly wrote, "I became who I needed," and closed the book. That one sentence said everything. All the battles, all the tears, all the days he thought he wouldn't make it, all the nights he wanted to give up, it all led to this. Not success, not fame, but strength. Real, quiet, permanent strength. He started walking home, not in a rush, just walking, breathing, free, no pressure, no deadline. Just the weight of self-respect on his shoulders, and that was enough. Because he knew now your life changes the moment you stop waiting for someone to rescue you. When you stop needing permission to start. When you stop calling yourself broken and start calling yourself becoming, and that's what he was now becoming, and maybe that's all we ever need to be.